Okay, I have a major announcement for fans of this podcast. We have now launched the brand new Unregistered Underground, which is the supporting listeners group for Unregistered. So now, with a very small monthly fee, you get the following benefits. You get access to my brand new monthly video show in which I react to news videos with Landry Harmon. That's called Unreported, and with your membership, you get to watch that every month. I will also be doing monthly AMAs in which I answer questions that are asked by members of the Unregistered Underground. Also, we will have many bonus episodes of Unregistered available only to members of the Underground. The first one now on the Patreon site is Hotep Jesus, and many people are excited about that because they're always happy to hear about Hotep's comings and goings. Then also we have private Facebook and Telegram groups that will be accessible only to members of the Underground. So go to patreon.com/unregistered to join up, become a member, and get all of these amazing new benefits for the Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group, the people I love most in the world. I hope to see you soon. Thank you. Thanks again to Headspace for sponsoring the Unregistered podcast. To get the same free 1-month trial to the mindfulness meditation app that changed my life, go to headspace.com/renegade. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. People on the left like to say that America is fascist, while people on the right often say that it is communist. But maybe they're both correct. This is my interview with James Lindsay. I am joined from Knoxville, Tennessee by the most hated man on the internet. It's James Lindsay. How's it feel to be the most hated man on the internet? I shouldn't be talking to you.
Isn't this like a Limp Bizkit song? Nobody knows what it's like to be the bad guy. It's really like break down and cry in a minute or something. No, it's interesting. I'm loved and hated. It's simultaneously. True. It's literally at the same time that I'm the most hated man on the internet. Apparently, I had a woman last night who, there's this thing I said that I was doing a kind of a crusade for the moms fighting back against critical race theory in schools. Mm-hmm. And so somebody said, you're gathering an army of 1 million moms a while back. And I said, I'm getting 1 billion moms. And this became kind of a trope around me for a little while. And so this lady sent me this message last night and was like, you need to make shirts about your MILF army. I want one. And so now I have a MILF army. So, that's working out okay, I guess. So loved and hated. It's fun. It keeps me on my toes.
And you're even getting into beefs with other renegade university professors like Ben Burgess. So you had the temerity to, was it yesterday?
I had the temerity to share an opinion. No, it was this morning. Oh,
this morning. Yeah, that's right. So you wrote in your Twitter, how are you enjoying the Sovietization of America? And Ben Burgess, who has taught for us and been on the show many times, he took issue with that because, as he pointed out, Bernie Sanders, who's the closest thing to a socialist, lost in the primary, and the Supreme Court is made up mostly of Republican appointees. So what are you talking about, James?
I'm talking about the political and cultural transformation of the United States to look more and more like the political system of the Soviets. And in fact, where there's this kind of unaccountable party that's going to call all the shots. They had their Soviet biology as a good example of how they ran things, the so-called Lysenkoism. We're doing that with medicine, almost an exact parallel, whether that's through COVID policy, whether it's through other things. But it's the development of an unaccountable political class that's ordering society and structuring it in terms of, there are the people we might in the today's parlance call them vaccinated, and then there are the people in today's parlance we might call unvaccinated, who are their class enemies, and the class enemies are being separated from that unaccountable political structure. And so when I say America is being Sovietized, I mean that we are developing a increasingly politicized system, in the sense that if you are a party apparatchik, you get forwarded, and if you are against the party apparatus, then you get marginalized and excluded from political participation one way or another. This is mostly happening, but not wholly, at the cultural level, with the Biden's speech about a war, or what does he say? It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. That's clear speech consistent with that. But we're also seeing this with the deplorable meme and this treatment of the J6, as they say, protesters. They've been made into this kind of scapegoat political enemy. And now we see that the feds were involved in that. How remarkable.
Right.
This is the kind of stuff you expect in a Soviet state. This isn't the kind of stuff you expect in the United States. We also see it, though, politically. For example, we could bring up the case where both the FDA scientists and the CDC top scientists, both in independent analysis and agreement, decided that the COVID booster vaccine shots are not to be recommended. And then you have the CDC director saying that, going along with the wants of the Biden regime, we're going to override that and we're going to recommend them anyway. But that's exactly the kind of thing that you see on it's a few steps down the road toward Chernobyl, if you will, but a medical Chernobyl rather than a nuclear Chernobyl. So that's what I see as the Sovietization of America. I don't know much about Ben, so I can't call him out particularly, but I don't see this as being terribly relevant to the minutia of how many people sit on a court that we hear repeatedly might end up getting expanded. I don't think it's relevant to the minutia of who won a primary election in 2020 or 2016, because the Sovietization process involves picking the preferred candidate who allows you to do your political agenda unaccountably. So Biden winning is not a strike in the favor of centrism if he was more or less installed. And we just bounced back 4 years ago, and we all see that that's what happened with Bernie versus Hillary, back when Bernie still had integrity and he hadn't sold out to the same apparatus. And so I see this as all clear Sovietization, the movement toward a Soviet style organization of politics and culture in the United States. Although it's got new flavors. It's got flavors that are redolent of the post-cultural revolution or during cultural revolution China. It's got flavors that are uniquely technocratic and very Davosy and intertwined with the fascistic corporatist element that, what's their word for it? Public-private partnership. So, it's got new elements and it's different. It's not a strict 1917 Lenin, Stalin, beat the chest, have the uniforms, da-da-da. It's not like Sovietism theater. It's Sovietism in essence.
I like it. Yes, culturally, I don't think it's even debatable that there has at least been a shift in American culture over the last few years, maybe even since 2016, toward certainly Soviet types of politics, Soviet types of discourse. And you see it, I think, you see it certainly in the government and in the major institutions, but maybe more disturbingly, you see it just in interactions between ordinary folk every day. Oh, folk. I know. I remember. I'll never. I saw your interview with Mark Lamont Hill, and he used the term trans folk, which of course is more politically correct. But you corrected him right away about that and demanded a retraction and an apology.
That's right. And he caved. It turns out you use the word folk correctly. You use the word folk as in kind of everyday people. That's one of its meanings. And then the other is the one that's derived from the V word in German that's pronounced the same way.
Volk,
which is a people like a nation that are bound by a set of cultural values and traditions and so on.
Yeah, which is actually, now we're digressing here, but that's really more MAGA territory, isn't it? And that's kind of where you went. Wait a minute. Who's the Nazi here? Who's the Nazi?
MAGA has class consciousness. Let's just open one more can of worms. That's what they have.
All right, let's not do that. Well, let's go there later. So let me ask you this about this political class. You say it's unaccountable. The political class that rules this society right now, according to you. How are they unaccountable? Don't we vote for them?
Well, we do. If we were in old Soviet Russia as it were falling down, we would at this point laugh grimly and say we do vote for them, and the political process is only as trustworthy as the elections, and we would just kind of leave it at that because none of us want to end up in some bad place, like banned from YouTube forever for having said that there may have been anomalies in certain elections. We just had the audit in Arizona come out, and it was some very suggestive fingerprints on it that perhaps there were some anomalies in the election. And so on the one hand, we can start there and saying, yes, we vote for some of them. And if those elections are of high integrity, then Soviet is the wrong word. If they're of lower integrity, that would be a very Soviet thing to have happen. But we can also add that, no, I did not vote for the director of the CDC. No, I did not vote for Anthony Fauci.
There you go.
No, I did not vote for anybody. I did not vote for Milley in the military. I didn't vote for any of this unaccountable political class. I did not vote for a single one of the CEOs who have banded together. I didn't vote for Jack Dorsey to ban my friend off of Twitter the other day for sharing a video where they went to a public event and asked Ibram Kendi if vaccine passports are systemically racist, and caught him in his waffle and lie of an answer and put it on the internet. And they had their account banned for putting that on Twitter for the sin of sharing for video of a event that wasn't supposed to be videoed. I forgot the exact verbiage in the email they sent them. You're not supposed to have videoed Kendi. Kendi has apparently in his contract that there will be no unauthorized video made of him at any of his talks.
Oh,
it was not posted, however, on the placard, so anybody attending in the crowd would not have had any way to know that. And so they asked him, are the vaccine passports systemically racist? He waffled through a very Kendi answer, a very politically expedient answer. Basically, he said that while white people don't want vaccines because of their political ideology, minorities can't get their vaccines because they don't have access, which is just false.
Completely false.
Completely just false. And so they had their account. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you expect again in a kind of Sovietizing situation. And I didn't vote for the people who have the power to control the flow of information on Google, on Amazon's servers, on Twitter, on Facebook, through any of the subsidiaries like WhatsApp or Instagram. I didn't vote for any of those people. Yeah. So no, we did not, in fact, vote for a large segment of the party apparatus. And I don't know where the accountability comes in, because you yell and scream and say, these people did, the people carry on to their elected officials and say, these people are abusing their power. These people are misusing the authority we've given them. And then nothing happens.
Yeah. And then there's these major non-government institutions that control much of American politics, like Twitter.
Correct.
That we don't vote for.
Correct.
Right. Correct. That have deals and contracts with the federal government, or are simply forced by the federal government to do what the government wants. But we don't get to elect those people.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. Now, do you believe, so I think the cultural deep state, right, is what I'm talking about here. There's a cultural deep state, right, that's not elected, that it doesn't even hold office, but controls political discourse, or much of it in this country, much of it. And we know that's very clear now. So I think we should be talking more about that, the cultural deep state. Does that make sense?
So that's like your Silicon Valley execs and the cultural milieu they find themselves in or embedded in.
Yeah,
and
well, the mainstream and the media. Yeah, the whole media, the New York
Right.
Times,
And
Washington
the people
Post.
they have to impress to keep going to the parties and to keep being invited and to not have their entity threatened with Section 230 shenanigans, etc. Yeah, of course.
Amazon, Netflix. I mean, they control, or they certainly they regulate certainly the political discourse in this country.
Right. I mean,
heavily.
Who can forget the incident of Parler?
Yeah.
Amazon controlled their servers, decided Twitter didn't need a competitor.
Incredible.
Gone.
Incredible.
Just gone. And now it's like Parler is back, but nobody will use it because people are afraid it got hacked and their information got stolen and all kinds of things.
And then the Hunter Biden laptop, which now I think is basically established that it's real and has what people said it has on it. I mean, that very likely would have switched the election if it had been if the mass media had covered it the way they would have if Trump's son had a laptop like that, right? And yet they suppressed it right before the election, and that was entirely, wasn't it, just private cultural institutions doing it on their own, choosing to suppress it. So that's right there. That is as important as anybody in Washington D.C. I mean,
we get to go back to Washington D.C. and to the unaccountables there, because was it the FTC that just decided that the social media companies violated no rules or laws by suppressing Hunter Biden's laptop? So the government has paid its quo for the quid at this point.
Right. Yeah. So Sovietization of America. All right. So we just made a pretty powerful argument. I like to think that's at least going on, but it's certainly not going on in every sector of America, is it? I mean, there's certainly large swaths of American culture and the American population that are not at all Sovietized.
Correct.
Or
it is going on. No, I would say that it's going on in the vast majority of publicly controlled institutions. And I would say that it's going on in the vast majority of corporations that are large enough to where they don't have to worry about if they're going to make payroll month to month. So bigger corporations, which stand to benefit from squashing their competition and so on. And so I would say that there's a clear, if you want, kind of institutional aristocracy that's now pulling itself away from the deplorable, obviously unwashed and unvaccinated plebs that are the rest of us. And so again, if you start to see that as a party that will concentrate its power and who has access to what it is, and then this kind of smashing down of the masses into an undifferentiated mass, again, you see this process of Sovietization. Smaller phenomena or smaller scale things are not under this control necessarily. Right. The larger the scale and the more institutional they are, I'd say the vast majority of professional organizations, the vast majority of major institutions, the vast majority, all of the universities, all of them, I think except for Hillsdale and Liberty. Hillsdale, Pepperdine, Liberty. Well, even Liberty, I've even seen some of their DEI stuff they have going on. So even Liberty is
what's DEI?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion visions, which is the tool that they're mostly using. It's one of the two big tools that they're mostly using to bend large institutions and corporations. The other also has a 3-letter abbreviation, which is ESG, environmental, social, and governance directives that define your investability as a company and the amount of support that you'll be able to garner from other people who are playing ball with the program.
Wow. Yeah, this is really striking. Let's think about this for a second. Major, large institutions in the United States now, how many of them are not putting out woke ideology? Fox News, although even Fox is a little bit woke these days, but basically not. And then
Fox is one.
And then
I heard the Murdoch-owned media is mostly not.
Yeah.
Recently, I read that.
Yeah. And then there's like half the Republican Party.
Yes, and that's a good point, because it's what I've been saying, because I keep running into different people in different walks of life and talking to them. What I'm starting to believe is that it's about it's about half of the Republican
Mhm.
Party is rebelling against this, and maybe about 5% of the Democratic Party,
Mhm.
and some fraction, probably it's even more, of people who identify as independent for obvious reasons. They're not going along with what the party says in either case. And so that contingent is, and I think that contingent is rapidly growing,
Mhm.
is certainly not going along with this program and is resisting this program and trying to get back to some variation of classically liberal, broadly speaking, approach. Whereas the other institutions are more or less going whole hog into it. You see a few companies around the edges that are bigger companies. Coinbase is probably the most famous, that have taken steps to go against this grain. But for the most part, you're not seeing. I think we're only starting to see, if we use the metaphor of a dam breaking as a kind of a visual, tactile metaphor for what's going on. We're only just, the cracks have already formed, and now we're starting to see a few stones fall, but the dam is mostly intact. Some water might be coming through here and there, and a few, chunks of concrete or rock or whatever have fallen, but for the most part, the dam remains intact. And of course, Fox was never really pulled into the orbit. The Murdoch empire was always a bit more independent. But the scary part that people don't understand, though, is it is about 50-50 with the Republican Party. Your old style neocon types, and then kind of your older libertarian types who haven't reset their thinking since 1995 are completely unaware of and incapable of discussing cogently what's happening in the world right now.
Yeah. Well, the neocons are fully woke, have been for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Fully woke.
Well, yeah, they're woke, pretending they're crypto woke is what they are. They're woke and pretending they're against it, or pretending that they're not. But yeah, this is what this is. It's the neocon agenda was always one of these kind of pseudo real parasitic things that was sucking off of the largesse of the Western world. Even our nemesis in the Frankfurt School were diagnosing those people correctly back in the day in the 60s. But they are a parasite, and the woke parasite is as much a parasite on society as it's a parasite on that parasite. And they're kind of like in this face sucker battle with each other. That's the way I see it anyway. Is that there's these kind of two evil entities that have sort of agreed in their malice against free societies to team up, like as this marriage of very ugly convenience that doesn't really work. At the level of like the institutional stuff. For example, why are all of these super globalist, therefore neocon corporations playing wokeness why are they standing out on the stage playing the woke fiddle while they're doing neocon globalist agenda? And then you start to realize that these two things are two face suckers sucking off of each other while they suck off the face of society at the same time. And that something in a sense, I think something new in the history of the world is occurring in that regard, is that you have two warring parasitic ideologies that are both massive problems in their own right, but they're also cooperating and antagonistic at the same time. Maybe this is the same, though, as what was happening in the early 20th century, where you had the fascists and the communists who were face sucking off of each other too. Maybe there's some parallel there, but in this sense, they figured out also a way to shake hands and be on the same side through this invention of a public-private partnership, which seems to be the rendering into English of Dengism, which refers to the Chinese former leader Deng Xiaoping, who was the one who figured out that if we open up the markets, we can have innovation and not be backwards communist China anymore, but rich communist China. And we can get the West to come invest in us and move manufacturing or whatever here. And he created a model where there's kind of very rabid, unrestrained capitalism inside of a communist tin pot. And that model, which we would call in English a public-private partnership, is being foisted as the model on the West as well. And there are any number of reasons for this, at least one of which is because it enables the people, like in China, there's strict information control. People on the ground, obviously, there's a black market of information that goes around, and they all use VPNs and so on. But the Great Chinese Firewall extends, and they have their social credit system, and it's very difficult very difficult from within to generate the kind of information sharing necessary to challenge a regime. And if only we could have, that's in East Asia, if only we could have one here in Oceania too, wouldn't we be in a different kind of world?
Mm-hmm. Now, wait a second. So are we seeing a Sovietization of America or a Sinofication of America?
It's a Sovietization, really, I think, because we're not adopting a Chinese model in the sense of it being a Chinese model. We're adopting a model. I mean, the Chinese model that we're looking at is not particularly Chinese. It's communist. It's been readapted to incorporate fascist elements. What we're looking at is a dialectical synthesis of communism and fascism into some kind of horrific new monster that was beta tested by a Chinese ruler. I mean, he may have said something about it. I know Mao said something about it being Marxism or Marxist-Leninism with Chinese characteristics or something. His plan, I'm not exactly sure. If Deng Xiaoping, I need to read more from him, said that what he was looking at was a market economy with Chinese characteristics, but I don't think it's Chinese characteristics at all. It's this kind of weird hybridization of communism with fascist elements incorporated in.
Let's do that. Let's break that down. What are the elements
of fascism?
Yeah. What are the various elements you see coming together and forming this hybrid monster?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea of the redistribution of both wealth and privilege is clearly the most communist part. And that's obviously happening under the umbrella of equity. And that's being pushed through the agenda of the woke broadly in general. And it's kind of headed under the S of the ESG, environmental, social, and governance, although it touches in the governance model as well. So if you want to have a good S score on your social score on your ESG measure for your big company or whatever, then you're going to have to play the redistribution game. So the communism's hiding in plain sight under the brand name equity. So the communism part's not all that hard. The idea that there's this enlightened vanguard party of experts that represent something like a bourgeoisie that will usher people through, it's a very Leninist Soviet model. That's obvious as well. In other words, a technocracy that's going to have the right ideas, the right ideology to kind of usher through this new revolution for this, new proletariat composed of not just and especially not even class, but rather various other axes of oppression, whether that's race, whether that's East versus West, whether it's North versus South, whether that's sex, gender, sexuality, ability status, yada, yada. So the communism has to be understood to have gone kaleidoscopic, to use a word from Jose Medina about it. It's taken on multiple axes of oppression, and yet equity becomes the means by which that is to be achieved, or a better way to put it is the brand name for it. And the fascistic elements are largely, people are tying that to social media companies primarily. It's the information control, the censorship, just being struck from your ability to participate in the digital public square by sharing wrong opinions, which is different than censorship. It's censorship, for example, when I do a long thread about wokeness and all of a sudden Twitter disappears for other people, but not for me, certain among my tweets that maybe get too close to the story. This happens routinely. It's censorship when they force me to delete a tweet. But when they just outright ban somebody from the service, that's something further. That's a purge. And so we have that happening there. But we also have this happening in the sense that the fascistic element, in that if you look back to Mussolini, what was fascism? It was corporatism. It was the merger of corporatism to the state, and in fact, creating, in effect, a state capitalism. And the revolving door that we see, whether that's between Pfizer and the CDC, whether that's between the social media companies and the FCC or whoever else regulates them, this public-private partnership in broad sweeping strokes is the establishment of fascism. So we have fascism now that has this goal built as part of its initiative to redistribute resources according to the neo-Marxist expansion of the categories of injustice. And And that's where you end up with this weird synthesis of fascism and communism. So no longer is it that corporations bad, it's corporations that don't play by our rules bad. That's where you have you've abolished fascism, you've abolished straight up old school vulgar, as they say, communism, and you've lifted up or sublated to this new thing that you have a broad speaking kind of redistribution communistic utopian scheme that's being affected through the corporate sector. So It's communism that has absorbed corporatism as one of its tools. Another way to put that, not to quote Mark Levin too eagerly, but another way to put that is, because if it was ever going to be, the American Marxism is going to look like, it's going to have to piggyback off of capitalism and maybe even consumer capitalism in order to affect what it's going to accomplish. Because what else could possibly work in America?
I've been meditating with the Headspace mindfulness meditation app for 6 years now, and I'm grateful for it every single day. Every day, as I tell all of my friends that I meditate with Headspace, and I've said this for 6 years now, I promise you, every day, pretty much, every day that I meditate with Headspace is a better day. I guarantee it. And then also throughout the day, even when I don't meditate, I use the techniques from Headspace that I've learned over the years about being centered, being focused, being in my body, being in the moment, rather than being tortured by the past or terrified of the future. It's a key insight that I use all through my life. And I've told many of my friends about it too, and they've also begun using Headspace. Many members of the Unregistered Underground and Renegade University are now Headspace devotees. So I strongly recommend this. Go to headspace.com/renegade to get the very same free 1-month trial that I used 6 years ago and that changed my life. So again, go to headspace.com/renegade to begin meditating and using mindfulness to change maybe everything that's important to you. Thank you. That's really fascinating. So sounds like it might be the case that the political economy of our country is looking more and more fascist in the corporatist structure, in the fact that much of our life now, even our intimate life, is governed by this merger of Washington and corporations. That's straight out of, as you said, that's straight out of the Mussolini and Hitler playbooks, and FDR, by the way, and Roosevelt as well. Right. Corporatism was, of course, the dominant economic mode in the early 20th century in those three countries. But then culturally, sort of at the bottom, you do have this redistributionist craze, and it is considered to be an unalloyed good redistribution of wealth and resources and power, I suppose. Yes, but look who got richest during the pandemic.
That's what I was about to bring up.
Yeah.
That was about to bring up. And there we get back to the Sovietization problem.
Yeah.
Because it is in name only that there is redistribution across the powers. Exactly. There is redistribution to the people pulling the strings.
Exactly.
To that vanguard party of technocrats that has established itself. That is where the actual redistribution is going. So within the school systems, for example, you see all of this, we must have DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racist, SEL, social emotional learning, infused with all this. We have to have all these things. And these things all require very expensive consultants to come in and teach people. And $3 more million of taxpayer money gets dumped into party representatives, party apparatchiks who happen to have written the book, have done the extortion racket on the school system, and just so conveniently happen to also offer the expensive consulting package that will straighten your school out. Right. And so it's like we're almost skipping the visionary portion of the process and going straight to the let's funnel all of the wealth to the people who have appointed themselves the powers, the anointed conscious powers who are going to usher us through the revolution.
So it's like the communist part is fake, but the fascist part is real.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Ironically enough, given that we're talking about the United States, which has been famously anti-communist, that being the irony, the communist part is the moral justification to pull off of fascism. And people are buying it hook, line, and sinker because it's now gone into this new model where we're going to use this fancy word equity, and don't we want diversity? And aren't you a racist if you disagree with any of this? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what's happening.
Racial justice and redistribution will be brought about by obeying what Pfizer and the federal government tell us to do.
Right. And hence these contradictions, like I mentioned with the Kendi and the vaccine passport, right? So Kendi is caught by that question: are vaccine passports systemically racist? Doesn't matter if you as an individual subscribe to the critical race theory definition of systemic racism, which, by the way, is a term that doesn't really have meaning outside of a critical theory of race. It doesn't matter if you buy into it. By the definition that exists, they are blatantly systemically racist. They blatantly create racially disparate outcomes.
Oh yeah,
that's Kendi's own definition of racism.
Totally
this hilarious circular self-referential definition. It was racism is racist policies that produce racist outcomes based on racist thinking or something like that.
Just so people know, in case people don't know, like the unvaccinated rate among African Americans is like the highest of all the social groups, right? Isn't it? Like, aren't they the least vaccinated? Yeah, so
that's right. And it's, I think, especially prominent in New York City, which actually has a mandate in place. So you're literally differentially excluding more African Americans from full participation in society than anybody else.
So right now, it's about 2/3 of Black people in New York City can't go to a restaurant. That's what the deal is. Not legally, anyway. They can't do it legally. Yeah. Right. That sounds like systemic racism. Yeah.
Exactly. If that would have happened in Little Rock in 1955, we'd be hearing about it every single day from the critical race theorists as an example of systemic racism and the impacts that it has. And so that's why these contradictions are there.
And let me just add on to that. Like, and the reasons that Black people generally have for avoiding the vaccine, you would think like everybody should be sympathetic with that. Libertarians should be, of course, because it's the government. Critical race theorists should be very sympathetic because they know about Tuskegee and they know about the whole history of.
They've done nothing but for 5 years trumpet that as an example of how racist the country is.
Yeah, and
it's like they operationalize the ground backwards on that particular point for themselves.
Right. But what they're insisting on is that we obey the dictates of one of the biggest, worst corporations in the world, or some of the biggest corporations in the world, and the federal government. And by the way, the vaccine started under Trump. So it is Donald Trump and Pfizer's and Moderna's and Johnson & Johnson's baby, and they're forcing it on us. And but worst of all, they're saying, this is just what you're saying, is that they're saying that's the only way to bring about justice for the people is to obey the dictates of big pharma and the Trump administration.
I know it's a trip to read Herbert Marcuse in this environment.
What? I bet. All right, man. So listen, you told me in private, but I'm going to divulge it anyway. That I think you're fine with this. You told me that you've undergone a major transformation in your thinking. In these recent weeks, you said. Very recently.
Yeah, really. It's just been in the past like 3 or 4 weeks. It's one of those things.
All right.
I was sitting on an airplane, which is, I think, my second most common activity right now. I was reading a book about the Enlightenment. I'm reading about these guys, and the things they're writing and how people like kill them or put them in jail. Like Voltaire got put in jail indefinitely for criticizing the king. And then he negotiated exile think about the stakes that these guys were writing on it. I was taken by this. So I'm reading this book about the Enlightenment. It's Fire and Light by Robert Burns. So it's not a particularly like right-wing treatise on this. The guy seems very sympathetic to Marx throughout, very warm, very clearly points out that this is, the abuses of racial minorities and things everywhere throughout history that it's applicable. So it's like this isn't some right-wing screed on the Enlightenment. I'm just reading this history of the Enlightenment that somebody recommended. I thought it was interesting. And it hit me. I was like, holy crap, maybe we're going through Enlightenment 2.0. A second Enlightenment right now, and maybe that's what's actually going on. And this isn't a novel thought. A lot of people have said, the printing press came out, everything went wacky for a little while, 95 theses on the wall, people translating the Bible, people spreading pamphlets, pamphlet wars are going, yada, 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 of course. And then now we have the internet, which is like printing press 2.0 if you want, and mass broadcasting in everybody's pocket, etc., through social media. But it struck me in a new way, and I think it's because I've been reading so much freaking Marx and trying to contextualize what I understand about critical race theory in terms of Marx. I'm looking at Marx's 6 stages of history, or historicism, really. and the model. And I've been trying to see if similar can be derived in critical race theory. And I believe that I can say yes, but that's tangential to our discussion. Because suddenly I realized, let's take for granted, this is the argument, let's take for granted that Marx's 6 stages of history is at least crudely accurate through the 4 that he was looking at backwards in time. He found himself in capitalism, which he marked as stage 4, which was immediately preceded by estate economies, which was immediately preceded by slave economies, which was immediately preceded by what he called primitive communism, kind of tribal societies. And then he projects forward into socialism and communism as stages 5 and 6. That projection is its own question, but to look backwards, maybe this is a crude fourth turning level analysis of history, but nevertheless, if we think about it, if we accept the model as a at least metaphor to understand what I want to communicate here, a lot of people, I think, assume that with the Enlightenment as it unfolded through the 16th through, I guess, 19th centuries, that we entered into the parallel in the information economy of that 4th stage of history, freedom. Everybody, democratization of information that's parallel to the democratization of property rights in capitalism. And I suddenly had the paradigm shifting idea that maybe the Enlightenment actually moved us from stage 2 to 3, not from 3 to 4. And so to make that more clear, if we kind of work the same stages, you have primitive tribal societies, and they would have had, their own kind of, little, in an information economy, their own mythologies, their own traditions explaining the world and their life within it. And those are going to have been kind of scattered all over the world or whatever, in kind of little islands separate. That's stage 1. And then stage 2, we have the rise of the major world religions that become magisteria, and the magisteria become the big controllers of information. And little as they would like to hear it, that would parallel to having kind of slave owners who organize all of society for you in these magisteria.
Yep.
And the 3rd stage of history, then, of information economy history, as I'm starting to see it now, would be the shift from magisteria into institutional expertise. So we have PhDs, we have the CDC now, but we would have the Royal Society a couple of centuries ago. I mean, still today, but emerging a few centuries ago. So you have these storied institutions that become the equivalent of information aristocracies and estates. And that's actually where we decide that we know things is, the big institution said it, so we can trust it. Oh, a PhD said it, so we know we can trust it. Oh, it was on CNN on television, so it must have been vetted, so we can trust it. And so you have now information landowners who tell us information serfs outside of those institutions what is and is not true. And now with the advent of the internet, people are doing their own research. In other words, information, I want to separate carefully because intellectual property has a specific meaning. So I'm going to say information property as kind of a metaphor to the capitalism thing. The idea that you can do your own research, form your own conclusions, and live your life according to your own conclusions is really only realizable under something like the internet that allows the average person access to do their own research, allows the average person to communicate with other people. You can even think of, rather than an institution, you can have Reddit becoming a Reddit thread can become a hive mind where various experts and lay people with various perspectives come together and solve problems faster than Harvard University can with all of its perfect experts. Or whatever. And so now we're entering into the wild, wild west of an emerging new stage of history in terms of an information economy. And so when we talk about these fascists, what are they? Well, they're the dying aristocratic order that also, just like you would have seen in the Enlightenment period, who they tried to cling to their property because what if in their suffrage or whatever, because if you give the vote and you give property to the stupid average rube, he's going to misuse it. He's going to squander the property. You got to keep it with the people the aristocrats who know how to manage things. Totally wrong. Absolutely wrong. But you have these information aristocrats now who are trying to cling to that dying order, but they have a pretty good means to do it, which is to establish a information era fascistic state where they control the flow of information completely. through algorithms and through banning and through the tailoring of social media in the digital public square.
Ooh.
And so the fascism now becomes a mechanism for them. If we can look at it one of two ways. One is to maintain stage 3 for themselves, but I don't prefer this explanation. The explanation I prefer is to minimize the length of the free information, the genuine marketplace of ideas that we are entering for the first time, which embarrasses and dethrones them as the technocratic expert class. It's to minimize the amount of time that exists and skip straight forward into this more Marxian fifth stage of an administered information economy, just like socialism is an administered material economy, just like equity is an administered economic, cultural kind of privilege economy. And so it is a attempt to skip the freedom stage, the marketplace of ideas. So my argument in full would be that there was never yet a marketplace of ideas.
Okay.
It maybe could be considered an ideal, but there never was one. And now it's emerging because it was, I don't know, maybe something closer to mercantilism, whatever you would have had under a feudal system. You had the experts, and the experts exchanged ideas with one another. Your average pleb every now and then made their way, but that's like a merchant making enough money to be able to influence a lord. So now we're in a completely different situation where some bundle of dudes on Reddit, I brought up Reddit kind of for a reason, some bundle of dudes on Reddit can completely wreck hedge funds by short squeezing them over GameStop or AMC or whatever.
So according to Marx and pretty much everyone, because it's just an established fact, you know, the emergent bourgeoisie, the capitalist class of the 19th century, destroyed essentially, effectively, the aristocracy of Europe, the feudalist system.
That's right.
Feudalism, right? Now, so you're describing a new feudalism, a digital feudalism, in which the or communications feudalism, in which our means of communication are controlled by this new aristocracy that we're calling fascists. Are you predicting that the new generation of free actors in communications are going to take down the old aristocracy, the fascists?
Here's where it gets difficult. So in the parlance of the day, I refer to this insight as a gigantic white pill, because I don't think that this is a containable change.
No,
I don't think it's going to be a smooth ride, though. But I do see, with the establishment of a social credit score as a literal spot of nucleation for this, the possibility of coming as close to containing this as it could possibly be done. And so therefore, I don't know if the destruction that should happen by the progression of this opening up of the information market will happen, because I see actually a means by which it can be put into long-lasting lockdown by the powers. The social credit score can be absolutely tyrannical in ways that have not previously been available. Of course, in Foucault's understanding of Bentham's panopticon comes to mind, because we have that, and it will get worse.
He just sort of a cell phone for people listening.
Oh yeah, sorry.
A smartphone.
It's very smart.
Is it smart? It's only smart.
I don't know.
It's only as smart as its owner.
Well, mine's incredibly smart then.
So social credit. Now, I'm thinking that cryptocurrency is the answer to that. We haven't talked about
partly,
crypto.
Yes. It is part of the answer for certain. I don't know on its own that it's sufficient, but it is, I think, a necessary component, because a decentralized, I should say, not regulated, decentralized financial market is necessary. They can't squeeze you with a social credit system if they can't control the meaningful aspects of your ability to procure goods and services in real life that you actually need.
I mean, communications and trade, as long as there are alternatives for communications and trade, which are happening. We have crypto for the trade, and we have brand new social media platforms that are emerging. Hopefully one of them will become dominant, or at least competitive. I mean, if we have that, then the social credit score is meaningless, isn't it? Almost.
That's the trick, is that alternative financial instrument, the means of trade, has to actually work. So given that,
Yeah.
that is one way that you can squash the social credit system.
Okay.
Yes. The social credit system, as they will build it, will attempt very much so to wrap crypto in and trap people. So what they know is they can't destroy blockchain, the technology. They can't destroy crypto as, that they can't destroy the coin. They can't destroy the ledger. But they can destroy the coin as a repository of value. They can make it where too many people, the cost of participating is too high so that most people won't, whether that's that you have to participate in a black market, or whether that's that you get it if they do have a social credit score in place, so you get so much negative social credit that it limits you in other ways, or they make it so much. This is also insidious, but there is a general law you can refer to as the law of convenience. That which is most convenient for people will almost always win. People will not willfully take the hard road and undertake unnecessary labor when there's an easier path for a long period of time. And so they can just make it, if they are successful at making it far more convenient to use, or some combination of those methods, whatever it takes to squeeze people out, carrot and sticks, to squeeze people out of unregulated crypto markets into maybe a state crypto market or whatever that they create for themselves.
That's what they're doing. There's these state-backed cryptos now.
Yeah, we're going to have Klaus Schwab coin before we know it.
No doubt about it. So you're predicting a long fight. You're not predicting a victory by one side or the other.
I think that if we were students of history, we would agree on that. I don't know what long means, because digital technology speeds up virtually everything. And so this is a fight that unfolded over, primarily a little over a century and a half, maybe, where it was really volatile in 19th century and 18th century technology. How fast it unfolds in 21st century technology is not clear to me. It will not be we change administrations and everything's okay. Orange Man runs again and we're all happy, or Ron DeSantis, or maybe some renegade Democrat arises, or some independent that is not a scary populist demagogue or something comes into. We're not going to elect a Teddy Roosevelt, if you will, who's just going to slam the door on all this and fix it. Now, such a character could come in and change a lot of things for the better. In fact, a lot of what's happening comes down to the fact that our trust laws and monopoly laws aren't very effective at dealing with those problems in industries that are mostly based on information, which are going to be your tech sector and your financial sector. Information exchange become the most important things. So those two, of course, where do you see the giant trusts, the giant weird monopoly type behavior? Those are the sectors, tech and finance. And of course, they would have a kind of revolving door back and forth between them as well, because it makes total sense for them to have their hands in each other's back pockets. But, when you look at the top two asset management firms, BlackRock and Vanguard, controlling over $20 trillion in assets already, now, that's substantial, but that's the kind of thing that we actually saw back in the late 19th century. When you see Amazon openly saying that they're planning on building something akin to company towns. It's like you have to pause for half a second. And it's shocking to me how many people, by the way, when I bring that up, have never heard of a company town and don't know what a company town is. Wow. And they're like, oh yeah, it's a town around a company. Like, yeah, it sure is.
Sounds nice.
Sure is around the company, isn't it?
Sure is. Yeah. Oh my God. The company's all through the town. The company owns the town. The company runs the town. The company manages the town and all the population in it.
And the company pays you just a little bit less than it costs to live in the town. So you're constantly a little bit in debt to the company and you can't get out of the trap.
Right. That's right. Peonage is a big part of it. Yeah. The store is owned by the company and the store charges whatever prices it wants because it's got a monopoly. Yeah. I learned to hate company towns from the left when I was a leftist. That's when we talked about the company towns as being like one of the worst examples of capitalism. This is what capitalism produces, right? It's kind of a modern, almost slavery peonage system. Yeah. So, all right. Now, I didn't hear a transformation in your thinking, though. What's the transformation? How have you changed your mind?
Black pill to white pill. I think that this thing is mostly uncontainable. I think it is a fire that will burn down
I see.
I don't think that they can. I don't think they can win against the force that has been unleashed.
Yeah. Right.
And the bigger part of it, so it's just like I said, it's a recontextualization of what I think is happening. So if you think that what's happening is a huge push by nefarious actors to undermine the West and to establish a new type of dictatorship that they have all the control, that's one way of seeing it. Mm-hmm. If you see it instead as a fundamental shift in the economy of information has occurred that's going to change the world in unbelievable and myriad ways, and the overlords of that system, of the existing system, the gated institutional narrative, as Eric Weinstein branded their messaging, if the aristocrats who run that are losing their grip on power, and that their takeover attempt is a desperate bid to hold on to power and to reestablish their control on power, you're in a very different perspective about what's happening. In other words, you shift from here are these bad actors coming in and pulling off a gigantic heist on civilization that might pull off, to, oh, these people who are about to lose against the force of the world, and they're desperately trying to do something to put the genie back into the bottle. So that's the perspective shift.
I am gray-pilled on this, I think. I think it's going to be a fight for the foreseeable future, because if you look at history, the printing press, it was predicted with a lot of reason that it would destroy the Catholic Church, which then was just known as the Church, but what we now know as the Catholic Church, which it did, and it very much did not, right? I mean, it did destroyed much of the Catholic Church's power and gave rise to all these competitors of the Catholic Church and all the Protestant sects and dominations. And it's weakened its power considerably, but the Catholic Church is still the Catholic Church. It's still around. It still has a massive amount of power, owns a lot of real estate, and 1/3 of the world is Catholic or somehow affiliated with it. So it's, but it's changed. I mean, the printing press obviously radically changed everything. It just didn't change. It didn't change the fundamental basis of power of the Catholic Church, or of governments, which the printing press was also supposed to challenge. Monarchies, it did to some extent. But, the printing press, it turns out, and here we go with Foucault again, it was discovered by those who held power as a very effective means of maintaining their power. When you control the printing press and use the printing press to your own means, you can now have propaganda and agitation, and you can control the political discourse, and you can control the discourse in a way that will ensure your continued rule. So it cuts both ways, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And it's like, as you just described exactly what you described, I was thinking, wow, that's how they describe the internet. Wow, that's how they describe social media. Wow, CIA figured out how to use Facebook and Twitter.
That's right.
to bend an election at the very least.
That's right.
And whatever else you're doing with the political discourse. The interesting thing is, and I don't know, I mean, you could say that everything that you just said, but the character of the Catholic Church has changed due to the competition that was created. The character, there aren't very many true monarchies any longer left in the world. And, so something very different has come along as a result of being able to exchange information and pamphlet wars, as it were. Right. And certainly there was a lot of ugly strife. I don't disagree with you. There's no turbulence is happening for I have lots of plane metaphors now because I spend a lot of time on them. But turbulence is happening for the next while on this flight through history. This is what's going to happen. But at the same time, there was a great opening up. You no longer had episcopate that told you how it was, and depending on where you were, a monarchical episcopate that told you how it was. You no longer had a magisterium ruling over you and ruling over your property. You now at least had a little bit of your own that you could do things with. And this did fundamentally change the world. It did fundamentally raise the standard of living. It did fundamentally make a lot of positive contributions. Even Marcusa is it produced a stabilized, prosperous, flourishing society. How terrible. Where are we going to find a working class to overthrow the man? There was even Max Horkheimer had an interview in '69 where he did the same thing. He was like, Marx was wrong. He thought capitalism would immiserate the worker, but advanced capitalism doesn't. It lets him build a better life.
That's right.
And the tone in his voice is like, oh no,
that's the problem. That's the problem. Yeah, right.
A stable.
Oh no.
Even Marcusa's like, and to be sure, it is a good life. but it's not, a perfect utopian life. And he even says it. I'm like just shocked reading this. So even the neo-Marxists were aware that it worked, and not perfectly, and not for everybody, and not equally, but that it did lift people out of a bad state to, we could say, a different bad state. But I would think that if we're going to put on our Pinkerian optimism glasses, speaking of people who haven't updated their files since 1995 about the world, but if we're going to put on our Pinkerian optimism glasses, referring to Steven Pinker, of course, I would say, his case that things have improved dramatically post-enlightenment for most people in most places most of the time is pretty damn good. That's going to inexorably continue, I think, as a 1995 Francis Fukuyama and a history nonsense argument. But so yeah, this is why I'm ultimately white pilled, though. I think that the internet is too wild for them. I don't think they're going to be able to contain it. I think that unless they crack the quantum computer code and can destroy all end-to-end encryption and thus break the communication, at least at that level, because it turns out, well, I don't know what'll happen, who will have quantum computers and who won't. But technology has a way of, again, being a genie that gets out of a bottle. And then, as they say in Harry Potter, the trouble is, minister, the other side has magic too. So the thing is, though, is I don't think this is going to be easily contained. And the reason is that I'm watching the direction of pilling. I mean, we've talked about black and white and gray. Yeah. Now we'll switch back to the old school red and blue. And there aren't a lot of people eating blue pills these days.
No.
But red pills rain from the sky.
It's true.
And if Uncle Joe, good old Grandpa Joe, comes out of office and they install President Red Pills, I think it's going to go, on steroids. I mean, in Kamala Harris, who turns out not to be a very popular person or likable.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
She came here to Oakland, her hometown. She and I grew up in Berkeley at this exact same time until she moved to Canada. We lived about 2 miles from each other in Berkeley. We're the same age. And
so you're friends. I got you.
We're super close. Yeah. And she came to visit. She had an official state visit to Oakland a few months ago, and not a single person showed up.
See, this is a part of the reason that I'm saying the pills, the red and blue pills, go in a particular direction. And it's like, I've had these events and people say they're going to protest. And I had this one in Houston, and it wasn't for me. It turned out Mike Pence also spoke at the event at some point. I was not interested in Mr. Pence, so I skipped the fancy dinner that I was invited to listen to him talk, and in fact went outside to the park to watch the protest to see what happened. There was about 15 people that showed up, and they had a megaphone and a cardboard sign, and the sign blew away in the wind, and they chased it down and they went home. They were telling Mike Pence he needed to step down, which was a bit detached from reality. I had one in Madison, Wisconsin, where 2 protesters showed up. That was it, 2. The biggest one I think I was telling you about this before we started doing this on the air, it was in Green Bay, and something close to 50 showed up, but they had no impact whatsoever. The energy is very low. Nobody's showing up to that side. The pills are only kind of going in one direction. And what I've seen, the biggest one that I've seen is where we talk about this kind of gated institutional narrative model of information, is I keep seeing them trying to pivot, it's racial justice, so let's switch to COVID and the vax. That one kind of worked. But that's because they lost the race card that they were playing on everybody. Critical race theory, calling everybody a racist, people just started kind of rolling their eyes for the most part. It's not as effective as it needs to be, but there's a lot more eye rolling and go away and boo or whatever. So they switched double down, triple down into the COVID argument. That one took for a little bit, but I think it's falling apart on them. I saw that Chinese woman, Liana Wen, on the TV the other day, completely contradicting herself. A Chinese asset or something woman, and completely contradicting her. I mean, it was like a masterclass in watching a narrative collapse in 30 seconds.
What was the contradiction? I watch her.
It was something along the lines of, because I try to remember how she said it, but it was very close to along the lines of, because the vaccinated can get the disease from the unvaccinated, but then the vaccinated can give the disease to the unvaccinated, who then give it back to other vaccinated. Then that's why it's very important that we all get vaccinated. It was something along those lines. And it's like watching narrative collapse in real time, to watch these 30 seconds from this face of state media. character. It was really stunning. So the COVID one's falling apart, but I've watched and I've been keeping count. There have been at least 6 distinct attempts to pivot to climate change as the big narrative push.
I've seen it.
And they just had Climate Week, in fact, and this whole, it's supposed to be this big thing, and they're all talking about climate change, and it's not sticking. It just doesn't stick. The first big narrative fail for the race one was the one that caught my attention, to narrative failures and pivot failures. And that was where there was the shooting of the, we'll say, massage parlor, the Asian massage parlor prostitutes, by the weird little bearded white boy. And they tried to say hate crime, racist in the midst of the AAPI or whatever disgusting acronym they're using now to lump people together. In the midst of that, they tried to frame it that way, and people laughed and were like, this wasn't race, they were prostitutes, and the guy had a problem. And it's like they attempted the CRT move and it failed in real time. And then, it's almost like watching, again, I'm not like a Harry Potter geek, but I did read them a couple times. And so it's like watching the Bogart get laughed at, the monster that takes the shape of your fears. And if you laugh at it, it changes shape into somebody else's fear. And it's like scrambling to find something that'll scare you now. So the narrative pivot keeps failing as well. So this convinces me that we have a situation in which people are pretty consistently running into opportunities to take red pills, but virtually nobody any longer is taking blue pills that keep them in kind of this old school way of thinking. More and more questions are coming up. As one of my favorite Twitter accounts, people think it's me, which I think is great. So I encourage that mythology. The Dr. Rollergator account on Twitter is a very, very, very smart guy.
Oh, yeah.
But he pretends to be a cartoon alligator that speaks only in caps and does kind of a comedy bit constantly on Twitter. And he's really funny, but he did some analysis on some of the, COVID deaths and the vaccines versus unvaccinated, and how the data were being presented illegitimately, triple counting, in fact, the protection of the vaccine to oversell it. And he did some very deep analysis. And his comment to me in private about that was, people are going to notice eventually. And this is the point, is that people are noticing that the narrative and the reality aren't squaring like we used to believe that they were.
Right. My neighbor just took down his Biden sign.
Wow.
It had been up since last summer. He supported Biden, I think, even in the primary, which is amazing. But yeah,
it's amazing that anybody actually supported him. It's like he's like your default, like, not the people I hate candidate or something.
And put a sign up in his window. I mean, which you see very little of. You see a lot of Black Lives Matter signs. So I live on the edge of East Oakland, but the further you walk into hardcore East Oakland, which is almost all Black and Mexican, the less you see Black Lives Matter signs and Biden signs. And by the time you get to like the core of East Oakland, which is non-white entirely, there's no BLM signs. There's none of that. There's no Biden signs. There's no Democratic Party, anything. It's clearly not happening. It's not penetrating into the lower classes that they claim to speak for. So your transformation has been toward just one of optimism. You are just now more optimistic about the future, and you think that will be more
big picture optimistic
freedom. Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, I have never heard you talk about, I've never asked you about your history, your political history. Have you always been like this?
No. Well, cantankerous and unwilling to just fit into a box. Yeah, kind of. So I would say that until I started doing the papers for the Grievance Studies Affair, I would have been firmly into the gated institutional narrative. The institutions are producing the most reliable knowledge box politically. From the first election that I was ever able to vote in, although I had a general belief that having balanced some Republicans and some Democrats, so I was always an independent. I leaned left as an independent. I almost always voted for Democrats, and I think that's largely because I live in Tennessee, which is completely red, and I disagreed with the majority of the staunch conservatives and staunch libertarians that live here, and thought that they went too far. I also, being that I, obtained a PhD and spent a lot of time in the institutional setting of academia, put in, like most normal people would, who don't have open eyes necessarily, would have looked at the big institutions as things that were putting out reliable information. So I was definitely caught up in that. The Grievance Studies Affair started making me wonder, very quickly. In fact, it was before we did the papers when I first read the infamous now feminist glaciology paper, which I forgot its exact title, something gender papers, something, I don't know, women gender,
about glaciers,
something.
gender
about
and glaciers. And gender.
Yes, gender and glaciology, unbelievably, and indigenous glaciology. So I read that in 2016 and was flabbergasted. And suddenly it was like having a hole blown in my ability to trust academia. And once you stop having unshakable faith in academia, then you start realizing who's informing everybody else.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. So the primary estate holders I now see as possibly being corrupt in the information world, if you want to put it in these new languages I'm using. And my faith started to shake at that point in all of the different things about what we were being told. I didn't start seriously questioning institutions until I saw this stuff leaping from academia to other institutions. City governments were first, corporations, etc., but mostly I'm talking institutionally, city governments. I had a guy that worked at the CDC sending me proof that the CDC was going woke in like 2018, which is really like right after we came out with the grievance studies papers. He was like, you should see what's happening at the CDC. And I was like, uh-oh, that's bad. You know, it's all these trainings about anti-racism and diversity. And it's like way before anything went flashpoint. Yeah. And then even though in 2016, I guess, I even made a huge argument that the left, if it kept calling Trump racist, was going to get Trump elected. And so I was already, not trusting the cultural shift on the left by then. And so I didn't fully kind of shift to I think radical institution skeptic, if you want. So a late stage postmodernist or something until last year. I red pilled myself. I was whole hog on the whole COVID lockdown, I was like, I don't know, it might be too far in the civil liberties. If they want to lock down for 2 weeks to slow the spread, I get it. We should do that. And however, we should probably put in writing statute of limitations on this where it expires and it doesn't come back. But, I still trusted them enough. And then I started collecting data when some of the southern states started to tentatively open up. I was like, aha, these stupid states are going to, have gigantic spikes in the virus. It's going to be terrible for them. And I actually collected data, and I contacted a data scientist I know, and I showed him what I was doing. He was like, this is brilliant. He was positive it was going to expose Georgia for being irresponsible, Florida, et cetera. And the data within about 5 or 6 weeks became undeniable. It pointed the other direction. Oh, wow. The locked down states were doing worse. The states that had opened were doing better. Yep. And I was like, something is wrong. Yep. And of course, as you would know, I've read quite a bit of Foucault at this point. So I'm like, oh, biopower, what do I see?
That's right.
Like,
see?
Oh, no. The biopower thing is happening.
I love it.
And so I red pilled on COVID then and started to get very suspicious of, why are they suppressing stuff about vitamin D? Why are they Because first of all, even if vitamin D doesn't do anything, literally, who cares?
Right. Exactly.
It's cheap. It's not dangerous unless you take ridiculous amounts of it. Like, who cares? Why are they doing this? I don't understand. And I thought they were just focusing it all on Trump. Then, of course, once the lockdowns didn't matter anymore because people had to protest against George Floyd dying or something, I was like, oh, it's all bullshit. It's all just political control. It's all just theater meant to gain and seize at that time power or maintain control through I'd read Repressive Tolerance. I'm watching Repressive Tolerance unfold before my eyes on a grand scale. I'm like, oh shit, I know what this is. And so
you think I'm not totally there with you. I mean, I'm super sympathetic with the politics of what you're saying, but I don't.
Yeah.
I'm still, every day I try to figure this out. Like, what is behind this? What's the motivation? Right. What's the motivation? Why push vaccines on people who don't need them? In fact, where it's more dangerous than not to get a vaccine, like children and people who've had COVID. What is that about? I mean, that is so outrageous. And pushing masks on children when no other country is doing that, where the NHS in England said it was dangerous to do that. It'll stunt their development. but all these American liberal parents are just like, can't wait to put masks on their children. What is behind all this? And then the lockdown in I have to wear a mask today in my boxing class, in boxing, because we have a mask mandate in the Bay Area. What's that about? Like, what is the motivation behind all this insanity, behind this extreme reaction to COVID? So I don't know. Every day I've been wondering about this.
I have a number of guesses.
Let's do it. I mean,
they're all bad.
You were making it sound like a conspiracy, which it might be. It might be.
So there are a number of things that I think we have now sufficient data to be able to believe, or sufficient information to be able to believe, that do look somewhat conspiratorial, but there are different types of conspiracies. So there are the kind of conspiracies like, oh, they want to stick us all with the vaccine because there's something in it and blah, 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 or they want to depopulate the planet or da, da, da. And with the number of reactions to it, and people are that pill is getting down throats right now too. But there are simpler ones as well. Of the more ordinary variety, the less nefarious, Bond supervillain variety. And so, for example, let's say that this information that has apparently started to come out regarding Anthony Fauci and his collaboration with secret research in the Wuhan lab, and then DARPA's involvement in this and doing bioweapons research using viruses, etc., turns out to be true, even if it's for some ultimately beneficial purpose, like figuring out how to prevent pandemics, even if it's for some beneficial purpose, which, by the way, they don't seem to be. You would think if they had a good purpose and they just screwed up, they'd be just saying that's what happened, and they're not. But let's say there's any number of reasons, but that these people, and again, we come back to our Sovietization. What if this is either by intention or by accident a gigantic screw up? And the truth is that Fauci is much more involved, and the NIH and some other players, as Peter Daszak and some of these other characters in these other institutions. What's the guy's name from North Carolina or whatever? And there's some weird connections going on. And they actually were trying to engineer what turned out to be SARS-CoV-2. They were trying to engineer it for a particular purpose, good or bad, bioweapon or, prophylactic of some sort. And it was unleashed on the planet. And they don't want their involvement to be exposed, which suggests they probably had bad motives, not good ones. Because if they had good ones, people understand, even in horrific situations like this, that mistakes do happen. So the cover your ass Chernobyl explanation is one possible motivation. And what's happened then since is double down, double down, double down, double down. And there could be something to where, they've got, just to be as charitable as possible, maybe they've got this wild hope that they know the vaccine is leaky. They know that, antibody dependent enhancement is possible, et cetera. But they have this wild-eyed belief that if we could just get 100% of people vaccinated so that there's no reservoir, you could actually stop the thing in some 3-week window after all the vaccines take or whatever. And we could actually stop it from being whatever. And then if they've got their asses to cover, everybody's like, yay, they stopped the pandemic. We don't have to do this anymore. So there's that kind of very Chernobyl incompetence argument that could possibly be, without getting into genuine conspiracies that are really ugly. The most likely scenario is that that's probably true on its own, but also that the vaccines being virtually, the more people who have vaccines, the easier it is to say we need to use proof of vaccine status for access to spaces, et cetera. In other words, we can start to institute a digital ID and a social credit passport of some sort or another. And so that would be the kind of thing as a conspiracy theory, but usually a conspiracy theory involves being a conspiracy that's secret and hidden behind closed doors and therefore probably not true. But I mean, there's a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset or something like that by Klaus Schwab from the WEF, the World Economic Forum. Right. So there's certainly people who are very much invested in the idea of changing the entire structure of the world economy and its operation. Whether, again, we can say for nefarious motives very easily, like we've already talked about to some degree. We could also say that they believe their own bullshit, that they've smelled their own farts and find them to be rosy, and that they are actually working to prevent the big problems that will come with a new decentralized information environment, whether that's cyber attacks, whether that is actually, maybe they looked at SARS-1 and they looked at MERS and they looked at Ebola and they thought, oh shit, it's only a matter of time till a really bad one hits. So we need to reorganize the world so that should the bad pandemic come, we actually can do the necessary lockdown that'll prevent it from spreading and wiping out a significant chunk of humanity. Imagine a new smallpox emerging, and you have the technology to actually make people isolate fully and feed them as needed for the necessary month or 2 months or whatever, so that you can stamp out that virus and prevent, say, a third of the population from dying. So they could have beneficial motives that are just the normal hubris. I'm not going to necessarily say that their motives are evil. When you add in that idea that they're losing control of their ability to control the narrative and continue with their very lucrative forms of evil, we're getting a little more critical in our theory now. I think I think there's a lot of credit to that. I also think that there's probably something worse going on with the financial situation of the world. The kind of bubbles of fiat currency are probably in worse straits than your average person knows.
Yes.
And that reckoning is coming. But if they can create a situation to control the social unrest that will come along with it, that will be torches and pitchforks for them. It'll be like Occupy Wall Street 2.0, but probably not going to get bought off and woke, divided and conquered so easily this time. And against undeniable necessity. That I've heard that this is another motivation that they have, is they know this is coming, and if they can create a control mechanism by which they can say, oh, that's an illegitimate protest, and you lose all your social credit, so you can't buy groceries anymore or whatever to participate in it, that they would like to create that level of control. And the they here are the public-private partnership partners in. So, the big corporate leaders, if they had a place that they meet that they name themselves after, like Davos or something, who are envisioning this kind of new, either this set of calamities that they want to be able to ride the storm well through, or a new economic and cultural and social paradigm that they wish to be in control of. It's some combination of those motives that remains a bit opaque to me.
When you say they, who are you talking about? Who's they in this case?
They are the would-be technocrats. They are the people, for example, the WEF and IMF partners. You can go to the World Economic Forum website and just read their list of partners. They actually list them. So it's the CEOs and top C-suite brass of the majority of all of these companies that are listed on there. I think they list nearly 1,000.
Okay, but you're not talking about actual policymakers.
Oh, certainly I am.
You are
definitely involved. That's like, so when the World Economic Forum puts out its fancy video at the beginning of the year, this year, a lot of people, I took screenshots of it. I still have them. Sometimes I remember them of, what's going on at the World Economic Forum and their great reset that they've announced, blah, blah, blah. And they have this graphic that's, people looking like they're at some kind of big socialite party. And you have all kinds of interesting faces on there. Joe Biden's on there. George W. Bush is on there.
Okay.
Ivanka Trump is on there.
Okay.
Donald is not, but Ivanka is right there.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, policymakers are certainly involved. The idea that Boris Johnson and Prince Charles are not involved in these things, given the amount of time that they've been seen operating with these fellows. But the idea that Justin Trudeau is not all in, all of these people using the same weird slogan, Build Back Better. Like, really?
Okay. No, it could be. I just wonder if people like Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden, especially, are so forward looking that they're able to do this, that they're able to think ahead that far and think, okay, there's going to be an economic collapse. And when an economic collapse happens, the peasants are going to rise up against me. But I'm going to have this whole system of social control that I was able to implement because of COVID that'll control them. I mean,
no, they are. Because they are participants in the program. They are not the forward-looking people who are,
gotcha.
If this is happening, architecting the program.
Gotcha.
Or at least, they're not the puppet masters in some sense, if you will. They're the puppets of this. And I mean, again, like, we can name Klaus Schwab specifically. he's been writing about this idea since like 1971.
Wow.
Which is, it's very interesting how his vision, seems very much like it's been derived from Marcuse's 69 essay on liberation. Although I've searched and searched. There's not a lot of like imported or parallel language. Marcuse has some very distinct turns of phrase, and they don't appear in Schwab's writing at all. But so I don't want to just say, oh, look how clear it is. But the same kind of themes, like Marcuse is very clear that the problem with capitalism in its stabilizing function ultimately is that it's going to cause basic needs to be met, that it's going to create another tier of needs above it that will then be met, that will then create another tier of needs above that. So it's an unsustainable system that will eventually cause its own demise. One of his arguments is that. And so then you see this focus on sustainability as the goal of the economy coming out. Schwab is one of these kind of, what is it? They call them Malthusians or whatever, that believes that there's too many people on the planet and we have to manage the population, and one-dimensional man. And near the end, Marcuse makes the same argument to say that, as things progress, that we need to manage the size of the population is, it's basically a foregone conclusion. Of course we will, and so, I don't remember his wording off the top of my head. One-dimensional man's got many pages, but I remember reading it on a podcast. I decided to read it for a podcast episode. I was doing that particular part or some other stuff. And then I remembered that, and I flashed over I even looked it up while I was recording the podcast so that I could read it. And I had forgotten the wording, and I read through it, and it was like, oh, wow. Let me read all of this, because this is super creepy what he's saying. It's not just like, oh, he mentioned that, somehow the population could get too big and we got to be thoughtful of that. No, it goes like the super creepy really fast in like 2 paragraphs. And so you can picture, and I don't know if he did, I don't know what Schwab read. I can't say that he read Marcuse for sure, but the timing's odd that his answers to all of these problems start emerging a couple of years after Marcuse frames the problems of capitalism in a very particular way, in a very persuasive set of essays that reached a very large reading audience just a few years earlier. And so again, I don't know. I'm not saying that, we have this Marcusian who put it into action, but certainly that would have been, if Marcuse was writing that, it would have been significant in new left thought coming out of those years. And for Schwab to have picked that up as kind of his strategic vision for how the world will need to change going forward, seems plausible without having any necessary direct connection or whatever.
Yeah.
There.
I mean, it's certainly consistent. Schwab's thinking is consistent with Marcusian thinking. That's the only argument you need to make, right? You don't need to show an actual connection between the two.
It's always fun when you can find one.
Yeah, it's nice, but just, the structure of their arguments, the major values that they hold are very much the same, right? Global egalitarian communitarianism, I guess.
Correct. And and again, the buzzword of the century we don't yet realize is sustainability, though. And that's really the heartbeat of his model. Yeah.
Marcuse, was he into population control? I don't think he was.
I mean, that's where I said that he's got that part near the end of One-Dimensional Man. He doesn't talk about it anywhere else that I'm aware of. And at least none of his significant or major works. But he does mention it at the end of One-Dimensional Man.
That's right. He said that.
Yeah. And so if you find somebody that's already got that predisposition in their thought, stumbling on that paragraph, everybody has probably been that person who stumbled upon one particular paragraph of a book that lit them on fire because it connected with some of their prior beliefs in a particular way. Again, it wasn't. Maybe it's independent.
Paul Ehrlich.
Either way,
Paul Ehrlich is a good connector, right? So he's very famous population control guy on the left, became a very famous climate change guy, and now he loves him some lockdowns, of course.
How about that?
Yeah, isn't that strange? Yeah.
And these things are wonderful for physical and mental health.
Yeah, and I'll bet $1 million that he read Marcuse.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah,
I mean, Marcuse was probably the most influential left-leaning thinker of the 1960s by maybe an order of magnitude.
For sure. Yeah. Pretty much every left-wing college student in the 60s and 70s read Marcuse. So
yeah, I remember reading it, and I don't remember the statistic precisely if it was the first year or total or something, but that One-Dimensional Man had sold, and this was in 64 when it came out, 300,000 copies, I think, in
Whoa.
its first year, but maybe it was over some longer span of time. But either way,
Wow.
300,000 copies is a lot of copies of a book.
Sure is. Especially
I just got my annual report the first year of Cynical Theories, and we did not sell, it turns out, 300,000 copies.
That's a big bestseller. I know that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we did really well. Cynical Theory sold a lot of copies, but it did not sell 300,000 copies.
No, I know. Wow, that's amazing about Marcuse, but not, it's amazing, but not surprising, I suppose. Yeah, because as I said,
and that was in the 60s.
In the 60s, when it was new, when it was brand new, and it's been read how many times since then? Of course, yeah. Fascinating.
I've read I've read One Dimensional Man 3 times actually, and it should be more clear.
Yeah.
I've read Essay on Liberation a lot more times.
Yeah, that's the one. Well, repressive tolerance to me is really the one, but
it's important.
It's all important.
Counter-revolution and revolt is
but if you want to,
it's amusing.
But if you want to show people that Marcuse is a totalitarian quickly, it's that essay.
It's repressive tolerance.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's total nut job. This amounts to censorship, even pre-censorship. But there's no but after that, bro.
No, you spend 20 minutes reading that essay. There's no way to escape that conclusion. He was a totalitarian. Let's talk about the right, and then I'll let you go. So you voted for Donald Trump.
I did.
Do you want to explain yourself, Mr. Lindsay?
I think that the proof is in. I mean, my primary arguments were
Dr. Lindsay. I'm sorry about that.
Doctor, that's right.
Doctor.
My primary arguments were that my biggest worries that because I did a podcast, you can go check and see if I really said this. I did a podcast in October before the election, after I said I was going to vote for Donald Trump publicly, and then was forced to account for myself on television in multiple countries and in various other venues. And so I said the biggest issue that I had was that he is beholden by the people around him to the left's broadly woke agenda, as one. As a second, that he's highly corrupt, and that this will have consequences both with foreign interaction and with his administrative state and what it will do, which is unaccountable power. And that 3, that the media is not holding him to account the way that it should. Whereas it was holding Trump to account for things that were literally just made up.
Yes. I thought you were talking about, okay. You flipped. I thought you were talking about Trump there. Sorry. Okay. Got it.
No. All those were things about Biden.
Yeah.
So I didn't trust the media to hold Biden to account for his failures and for the bad parts of his policy. I fully expected that his administrative state and maybe even corruption with foreign entities that are not in the best interest of Americans would be a massive problem. And I also saw him as not necessarily woke himself. In fact, I said I didn't know if he was or not. I don't think he knows necessarily even what it is, but that he's certainly beholden to people and that are woke and to the movement that is woke. And that wasn't like conjecture. He already just put out his massive equity plan that is probably, some of it's already been found unconstitutional. So with distributing aid to farm workers or whatever it was by race was found unconstitutional.
That's right.
And so, or illegal against the Civil Rights Act. I don't remember which one that they concluded, but illegal at any rate. And so these catastrophes were the primary reasons that I said that I was going to vote for Trump, because at least he offered some bulwark against those things. I did not think that Trump was a disciplined enough character to be the character who could put a stop to the giant problems that were obviously amassing. And my biggest hesitance was my argument for why somebody might vote for Biden, because you should have one of those, wasn't so naive as to say he's not Trump. It was to say that for whatever set of reasons, whether it's Trumpian himself, whether it's what the media did in reaction to the existence of Trump, and so a mythology about Trump created by the media and institutional complex losing its mind, so-called Trump derangement or whatever, the point was that in no circumstance whatsoever would it be possible to cool the cultural circumstance with Trump remaining in office. And so any cultural level change had to take place at the level of Biden being in office. And so I didn't know which of those two things would be more important. And even to this day, I still hold some reservation, even with all of the damage, because if similar damage were occurring or not under Trump, or if it were not occurring at all, it's far less likely that people would be waking up and seeing what's happening. The fact that this stuff is happening under Biden, when many people who voted for Biden believing it would stop when the adults got put back into the room, as Sam Harris phrased it, is very enlightening to people. It's very alarming to people. And so, because I think that the problems that we have are, and I've thought this for several years now, are much larger than political problems. They are, in some sense, metapolitical or super political. I don't know which of those is correct linguistically yet, but they're above politics. Which is why half the Republican Party, as we discussed earlier, is a problem in the exact same direction as the woke problem. It's not a problem of its own type. Some of it is. QAnon is that problem, but of its right-wing type. But half the Republican Party is caught up in the so-called, as people refer to it as the uniparty problem, is that we already have this one kind of elite party. It's a fusion of establishment, highfalutin, whatever, Republicans, and the same on the Democratic side. I just think that the left-wing populist wing has basically been smashed and utterly demoralized by the woke corporatist establishment Democrat machine that has gone woke and used woke is actually woke is a very potent weapon culturally, but it's not a very effective weapon against conservatives.
No.
They catch some flack, they catch some fallout, whatever. It is a nuclear weapon against people on the left. And the left-wing populists were absolutely obliterated by woke.
Yeah.
This is why it's so sad to see so many of them, missing the fact that the left-wing populists are the most silenced group of people in this country in terms of their actual views.
Actual Marxists.
Yeah. They can say things but they're absolutely ineffectual. The woke monster, the Democratic Party monster, has Bernie 2016, before he rolled over for Hillary, was their last stand.
I know.
That was it. And Bernie's been part of the system ever since. And anybody who doesn't get that isn't paying attention. It's like I was even having this conversation when I was in Oklahoma recently with a very conservative guy. And I said, I didn't agree with a lot from him, but I at least respected Bernie for being that guy who would stand up for his principles. I didn't even like a lot of his principles, and I would prefer that he didn't stand up for him. But that said, I at least respected that he stood up for him. And I remember just being so disappointed in the guy, watching him roll over once he first to Hillary, and then later after the election, he actually went woke. What I used to like about Bernie Bros was that even though I disagreed with a lot of their kind of extreme democratic socialist leftist type views, what I did like about them is that they were as rabidly anti-woke as the next person.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then all of a sudden Bernie rolled over and half of them are like, well, there is systemic racism. I was like, oh my God. You free thinking, you are not free thinking. You're just another tool. It's so disappointing. It was so disappointing.
Yeah, the hardcore Bernie Bros are still anti-woke and anti-corporatist. So it's the
left-wing populism is still there.
Yeah, it's
just you can't hear it.
Yeah, I agree.
It has no outlet to the surface.
Right.
They are your left-wing populists are as marginalized in political discourse as the QAnon folk.
It's your friend Ben Burgess. You could have helped him out, given him a bigger platform by going on his show to debate him. Come on.
Brother Ben does not realize that he does not yet realize that he and I are on the same side. We can disagree about all the things we want to disagree about later.
Saying that. Yeah. I've been saying that for a while. That
he can be dead wrong in 5 years.
MAGA and the Bernie Bros are brothers. They're brothers.
We all have class consciousness.
That's right. That's right.
We all realize that there is actually a very bourgeois elite that is ruling over us.
That's right.
And that we are aware, and that we are in very Marxian fashion spontaneously beginning to organize to claim back the means of production and distribution.
Yep.
The only difference is we don't want socialism.
Right.
We don't want to progress to that's where the split is, because a lot of the left-wing populists do want to progress towards socialism, and the right-wing MAGA populists do not want to progress toward that. They want to stay in free, something roughly classically liberal.
Right.
And so that old fight between liberalism versus socialism, and there are many non-communist forms of socialism, that old fight is preventing these two co-belligerents. We don't necessarily have to be friends. Co-belligerents from recognizing their co-belligerents.
Yeah. The other major difference, maybe this might be the most important difference, or similarity, is that between the non-left, I hate saying right because I'm on the non-left, but the non-left and the Bernie bros is that they all identify liberals as being the leaders of the political establishment, right? As the end, liberals are the enemy now, right? To the Bernie bros and MAGA, right? Whereas it used to for lefties like that, they used to be stupid and think it was Republicans who are the problem, right? But now they're developed a level of sophistication where they see that all the major institutions, all the major structures of our society were built by liberals and progressives over the last 100 years. And so it's very fun to talk to them because of that, because they see that. Whereas most liberals don't. Most liberals just, it's the air they breathe, right? Or the, fish in the water. The water is liberalism. They don't realize that it was put there by particular people for particular purposes. I want to ask
postmodern of a view.
I know.
Well placed.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Man, I've got so much. I largely don't agree with the way they did it, but I like the analyses, particularly of Foucault, somewhat even of Lyotard, and then of Baudrillard. I'm not less of a fan of Derrida, but
me too.
These guys saw this comet coming 50 years ahead of everybody.
They did. They really did.
It's unfortunate that their set of biases, which would be their deeply leftist milieu that they were kind of hung in, prevented them from being able to articulate it in a way that really nailed it.
I agree. And that could have appealed to a broader base among conservatives and libertarians. They did miss an opportunity there. They could.
I mean, look at Lyotard's idea of legitimation by parology in light of what's happening.
Oh, I know.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And hyper reality with Baudrillard, and it's the desert of the real. I mean, the whole thing. It's just like
the last 2 years is like, it's like an illustration of what Foucault's been talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Last thing before you go, I have learned mostly from you about this thing on the right called traditionalism or trad. And apparently it's taken a lot of interesting new forms. For one thing, you said there's trad postmodernism now.
Homo trad, yeah.
Homo trad? What is that?
Well, it's like, okay, so we have to kind of agree on what trad means.
Yeah.
So trad, of course, means like traditionalism or leaning toward traditional values, traditional expressions, traditional norms and expectations. Primarily, you're going to talk about traditional gender norms, traditional values shaping life. So what would a postmodern, and I use this more in the Butlerian sense, trad look like? It would be one that takes it on, but ironically, self-aware irony leading it. So they lean into being traditional, knowing that it's performative. And so the pomotrads are people who are performing traditional values as a form of social protest against the woke establishment.
They don't actually live it.
Well, they play it. Yeah. So they do live in that play.
Okay.
But they know they're LARPing.
Okay.
They know that they're doing a live action role play of traditional values that they don't deeply embrace themselves. So they might put on the, traditional sundress or, the vest with this button down or the, whatever, the old style clothing. And they might create was going to say, I'm trying to think of the word, like the preppers do, self-sufficiency kind of lifestyle or whatever, but they're kind of playing at it. If they don't really have enough peas, that's okay. They'll go buy them. If the pea crop doesn't really come in, they'll plant a bunch of, they're just gardening for the first time and pretending that they're farmers.
Right. Okay.
And, they're not living off grid. That was the phrase I was looking for, off grid. They're not successfully really doing it. They're pretending to. And so it's performative, and therefore it's virtue signaling, almost as a form of protest, a politic of parody, if you will, but using traditional forms rather than anti-traditional forms. So it's like a reverse Butler.
Gotcha. Judith Butler. Judith Butler, you're referring to, yeah.
Yes, Judith Butler,
the Pomo queer goddess, yes, who created much of this thinking. Now, you said that the trad right is growing and will continue to grow and might become a force in American culture.
Afraid of it. I don't know. I have different arguments with different people about this because it's largely not very popular.
Okay, good.
It's largely not very popular. What I see in kind of salt of the earth people, I used to be very afraid that we were going to have a backlash into like genuine racism and all of these kinds of things making a resurgence. And when I talk to salt of the earth, right-leaning people, this is unlikely to be the case. They say things like that the word racism doesn't mean anything to them anymore, but they know what it is and they're still not participating in it, and they're still not going to tolerate it when they see it. So this is a kind of mainstream view. So I'm not sure that it's going to take off, but there are these kind of movements taking up right now that, whether they're kind of this LARPing traditionalism or LARPing right wing, that are gaining popularity because it gives people a structure that they can dip into that resists. It's not woke, but it's actually signaling anti-woke, but it is still kind of pretend. But then there is actually a growing movement, and I don't know why. It's mostly Catholic in people following it, but there's a genuine new right rising, and then there's kind of an orbit of other new right thinkers around it that, in their extreme, hold up models like Pinochet and Franco as ideals for how to fix this problem, or that they're looking for a strong revival of old school, church-centered dominance of the community. And this movement on it has integrated within it very concerning groups of people or cells or a very concerning reactionary wing. So there is a genuine reactionary thing that is gaining popularity. And my feeling is that the reason is because there are things that are true that you're not allowed to say.
Yeah.
A vacuum of truth is one of the most dangerous things. And all throughout history, you see vacuums of truth being filled by extremists, because extremists will become the only people willing to speak into that vacuum. And so you can imagine that there's this true thing you're not allowed to say, whatever it happens to be. And then somebody over here says it. And all of a sudden that person gains credibility.
Yep.
Because they said it.
Right.
And people will then listen more to that person, and that person's ideology may become more attractive because it gave them the courage, it gave them the necessary insight, whatever it happens to be, to have spoken that particular truth. So you can have a bundle of falsehoods, dangerous falsehoods even, that get taken up in a way in terms of their credibility, the respect accorded to those views and systems of thought, that get much more seriousness is given to them than otherwise would be, because a vacuum of truth exists that they were able to exploit. And that's the dynamic I believe that I'm seeing. So whatever the example might be, they're willing to just call the woke movement out for what it is. Call it, something along the lines of communist or fascist, whereas other people are still afraid to say this because they might get called stupid. Say that it is a genuine threat to the Western civilization and the free way of life, which it is. And if other people, especially the respectable commentary class, are unwilling to take those steps and make those statements, they create a vacuum of truth that these more radical voices will fill, gain credibility, and then people become interested in living the lifestyle or adopting the ideology or the system of thought that led them to have the backbone to say the true thing that nobody else was willing to say. I think this is a story as old as time, a phenomenon as old as humanity, and a problem that we are facing. I don't know how far it will go, but there is certainly a new right that is self-aware, that shares in common characteristics of what people have ominously referred to as the sleeping giant, which is kind of a throwback, genuine reactionary movement that may actually become violent. It shares in common threads with the sleeping giant, or themes, and the sleeping giant may actually be a subset of this newly self-aware new right that is arising in answer to the time that we're in. And while I know people who describe themselves within this new right circle, and they tend to be thoughtful and they tend to be responsible generally, they tend to say they tend to make very forceful statements and very kind of a concerning closed-end approach to future societal governance and organization, as opposed to one that remains within that kind of more open, classically liberal, free tradition.
So what do they want? They want dictatorships?
Some have said dictatorships. Some have said that they want to head toward theocracy. Some have said that they want to head toward I've heard a call for a crusade. And speaking of theocracy, we need another crusade.
Great.
Yeah. Like I said, they hold up, talking about autocrats and dictatorships. I've heard them hold up Franco and Pinochet as examples. One guy I talked to defended Hitler and with the phrase, at least he knew how to stop communists. And monarchies is actually, they're actually monarchists in many cases,
yeah, I know,
calling for a return. So what they're seeing, if we go back to my new paradigm that I'm thinking through these things right now using, they're seeing the collapse of stage 3 of information history and wanting to go back to stage 2 because where it was safer in mama's womb, rather than move boldly forth into this new free stage, or more importantly, to skip the ability for them to put a clamp down and usher us into as Marcusian would refer to it, an administrated state.
Yeah.
Administered state. That's what he calls it. Sorry.
So it's looking a bit like the 1930s, isn't it? We have communists on the one hand, and then we have these fascists and monarchists on the other hand. I mean, there's some major differences with the 1930s, and the internet's the main difference, I think. Technology.
And we also just had a very like freewheeling, rich largesse, party-filled Weimar flavored set of preceding decades.
Oh, right.
To add to that.
So yeah, those of us who are neither communist nor fascist, it's what do we do? What do we do?
Well, there's a simple roadmap for activists, which is to get informed, get organized, and take action.
No.
And
I'm too tired for that. I'm tired, man.
I'm tired.
You do the work.
That's exploitation. No, I mean, honestly, and I know that this is my own bias speaking because it's what I do. Speaking truth into this problem and pointing out these, if we want to take a more critical approach, pointing out these contradictions in the official narrative. If we want to take a more liberal approach, speaking truth into these problems, I think is the starting place. We do actually have to activate people to be aware that there are dangers besetting us to the left, quite clearly, I think, at this point, but also a rising danger that should not be underestimated. Rising from the right, and so at the cultural level, people need to start to realize that understanding what the principles are that we might share in common, or broadly speaking in common, and the life that we want to live and where we want to see the world go, is something that people actually need to reflect upon, find out what those are and what they mean to you, and what it would mean if they would be taken away, given that they are likely to be taken away. And I'm hearing now that the younger generation, the youngest, the generation that is under 25 right now, I keep hearing from people in that they actually are starting to awaken to the idea that their opportunity to live a life of freedom is being taken away from them without their consent, and they're getting pissed.
Good.
I've heard it put in exactly those words with the indictment: you boomers, you Gen Xers, even you millennials got to live most of your life in freedom, and you're not even giving us the option. And so, the youth in that regard, outreach to the youth is actually very important, but it all is going to come back to making big picture decisions. Do we want to live in a in a collectivist situation or an individualist situation? Do we want to live in a circumstance that values freedom, or one that is led by technocrats? And then starting from that values perspective, and of course I'm talking about this kind of like individual thing, then you can start to shape what kind of action you're willing to take. So getting informed, getting organized, and taking action is ultimately what it takes. But in the moment that we're in now, we are actually far enough into this, if we want to kind of bring it a little bit full circle, into this Sovietization, to where one of the more effective things that we have available to us is the throwing of sand into gears.
Yeah.
We don't have the ability to blow up the machine, but we have the ability to make the machine grind itself down and wear itself out by expending too much of its energy. The pathway to that, of course, is basic civil disobedience. To the extent that it's possible, given what you have to do in life, to refuse to participate in putting a fascistic symbol on your face, to be in public or whatever, to adamantly refuse, again, something like, whatever you feel about the vaccine, I'll tell you, do your own research, make your own decision, consult your healthcare provider, whatever. I would know what I would advise you if I knew you, based on what your situation happens to be. Kind of, I have my breaking points here and there on each direction. But whatever you think of the vaccine passport is a dangerous step that must be resisted. It is not benign in any regard to hand over the ability to control your ability to move and enter and participate in everyday life to something that can be utterly controlled outside of your hands and through some opaque system, to where what you have as the user experience is a QR code that's either green or red, depending on how the powers that control that QR code decide it needs to be that day. You do not want this thing. It's a box you don't want to open. And so resisting arbitrary power, as the Tennessee state constitution has it, I think is an important line in the sand to draw. In fact, the Tennessee state constitution is one of the most base documents that I think I've ever read. Article 1, section 2 is the one I was just referring to. It starts off with an enumeration of 36 rights for the citizens. And the second one is non-resistance against arbitrary power is absurd, slavish, and beneath the dignity of humanity, or something like that. And so you must resist arbitrary power, with a civil disobedience. So we are still at the stage, though, where unless you're in a state like I was just in Oklahoma that's getting organized very effectively, what you do is either start taking leadership and organizing, or you linger in the getting informed phase of the stage and spreading information. The Enlightenment proceeded, and the liberal revolutions of the 18th century and 19th century proceeded primarily by people networking with one another and sharing information and pamphlets and sitting down and talking and reading through things together, basically forming study groups. Not unlike, Renegade University becomes a digital front runner of this kind of mentality. So, engaging in things like this, where we're now thinking in terms of, historical thought and long kind of, deep dives into philosophical origins of what's going on any of these different sides of the aisle. The woke thing has a long history of thought that can be understood, and therefore its trajectory can be somewhat understood. Same with liberalism, same with, postmodernism on its own kind of cleaved away from the woke thing that has usurped it. Same with these kind of neo-reactionary or reactionary movements on the right. They also have long histories of thought. They also can be read and comprehended. It's a bit much for any one person, but you start creating kind of reading groups and things, or, an online university program, and you have kind of some options.
Amen. I love that. That was beautiful. Yeah. So speaking of Renegade University, we are going to get you back in our classroom soon, aren't we?
I aim for this. I would love to do this. I want to sit down with you and whoever else we can find and teach the world about the critical race theory.
Yes.
Specifically, I think my expertise is in that subject has actually peaked. I'm now I've written recently something that's not published yet at book length that I'm hoping will be something of the definitive word on critical race theory.
Oh yeah, you're undoubtedly one of, if not the world experts on this subject. I mean, you've read as much as anybody has in critical race
I've read
theory.
an unbelievable amount of it.
Yeah. There's no
And like I was
question.
telling you before we turned it on, they're kindly, unlike Mr. Marcusa or doctor or whatever, and that you can read them. They are clear
Right.
in their writing.
Right. They are.
It's actually comprehensible and it's definitely not like trying to parse through of grammatology or some horrific exercise in self-flagellation.
Right. Exactly. Well, my friend, this was a lot of fun as always. Thank you. Gosh, your mind.
It's great to see you again.
Yeah, man, your mind is something else. It's dense but accessible. I mean, there's so much in there, and there's so much that I've never thought through the way that you have. It's always elucidating to talk to you. Let's put it that way.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I will talk to you very soon about teaching.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
See you soon. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.